we're already down to a very low portion of the supply of XRP on exchanges. OTC desk and dark pools have very little left. What's on the exchanges is very little left. You've got other people committing capital for XRP in their treasury strategy. And so all of that combined, you have a supply shortage. And I think that's going to push the price to somewhere between 3 and 4 digits in a very short period of time. They absolutely do sell XRP every single month onto the market to be able to fund their business and their acquisitions and their growth. People look at that and they say, okay, well, they're suppressing the price. They are. They're holding it down. They're holding it stable. We've never had a full audit of Tether. We don't know exactly what backs all of their one-to-one that they're supposed to be doing. They also aren't compliant with the Genius Act for XRP. I think it's a wealth transfer where good-hearted people will end up with enough value that they can affect real change for others and do cool stuff.
In this conversation, we speak with Jake Claver about why the global financial system is sitting on a ticking time bomb that most people have no idea exists. Why, when it goes off, the only asset in the world with enough liquidity and infrastructure to absorb the shock is XRP, and why Jake has put his entire net worth behind that single belief. These are the highlights from our conversation with Jake Claver on our live show, Memes and Markets. Let's dive in.
What is going on, my favorite people? Keith, how are you, my man?
Today's the best day of my life, Ben. How you doing?
Same, man. Today is the best day of my life. I'll throw it back to you so you can intro our awesome guest here and we can get rolling.
We got Jake Claver in the building, folks. How you doing, Jake?
I'm blessed, brother. Appreciate y'all having me.
Of course,
man. Absolutely.
Where should we start with this thing? Because there's so many ways we can take this. People in the chat are excited, and so I'm going to throw some names up in the chat so we can say hi to everyone. We've got, how are you saying, the best day of my life? Let's get it. Love it.
Let's get it.
We got Dave. Dave's a mainstay. Good to see you. Best day ever. Let's go. All right. So Keith, I'll throw it to you, man. Where should we start with Jake?
Jake, prices are down. People are losing their minds. But
no, dude.
From what I understand, you have some ideas of how things can continue to shake out from here, right? There's a little bit of a fantastic theory that you've put out called the domino theory. Is that still in play?
Oh, 100%.
So I wanted to start off with starting to just basics of this XRP domino theory and what it really means for XRP holders.
Yeah. So kind of the premise behind this is an amalgamation of context that I've curated for myself for the past, 4 or 5 years. I put the domino theory out almost 2 years ago in March of 2024. And, since then there's some iterations to that. But in the original one, I talked about, we wouldn't have clarity for anything other than XRP. We would have a stablecoin bill that had been passed. We would have ETFs for XRP, which all have come to fruition. And we're still waiting on the Clarity Act here in 2026. And so that puts XRP in a unique position to be able to take significant market share if there is a crisis where liquidity is needed very quickly. It all kind of goes back to really Bretton Woods in 1944 when there was a change in regime and the dollar became the global reserve currency. Since then, we've in 1971, Nixon removed it from the gold standard. August 15th, they closed the gold window temporarily, never reopened it. And since then, we've had floating exchange rates with the US dollar with all the other currencies pegged to it. So then we had the petrodollar for a long time, which we now see as, going away. If you asked most people, they would tell you that the dollar is no longer going to be the reserve currency, which was not the case 4 or 5 years ago, even slightly after COVID, until we printed all the money and saw the debasement that we've seen. A lot of people thought that the dollar would remain the global reserve currency in perpetuity. Well, the best way to make sure that you maintain status is to disintermediate yourself. And I think that's really what, the US government and other large corporations have done with XRP. But the catalyst that I see imminently on the horizon is a spike in oil. And you might say, well, why does that matter for crypto, right? Like it's a commodity. You look at gold and silver, they're not correlated, the asset class. Actually, Bitcoin's down while gold and silver have ripped here at the end of 2026. Oil is important because it's the cost of energy. So as energy costs rise in an economy, you see inflation spike. And the way that a central bank can combat that is through raising interest rates. Japan has kept their interest rates at, 0 to sometimes negative over the last 30 years. And we've seen a significant rise in their bond yields with inflation, rearing its head in their economy, people not believing that they're going to be able to pay the interest that they have. And so when people sell off bonds, they have to incentivize people to hold them. The interest rates go up. And really now they're kind of backed into a corner where a lot of people have borrowed tens of trillions of dollars over the past 3 decades and deployed that capital outside of Japan. China's really good at this. If you borrow money in China or have assets in China, they want you to invest 90% of that money back into their economy. You can only take 10% out of China. And that's why you see ghost cities in China, right? Like they'll build these huge cities worth of real estate and then nobody lives in them just because they have to put the money back into their own economy. So, anything constraints that you put around stuff causes issues, but Japan didn't do that. So all of that money that's been borrowed from the Bank of Japan has either been put into US treasuries, basically as a risk-free return, right? Like you borrow money for 0 and you're making 4 or 5% on it. It's pretty good, especially if you can borrow large amounts of money like pension funds and sovereign wealth funds can. Hedge funds do the same thing. Warren Buffett's borrowed from the Bank of Japan. Everybody and their mom that has had the ability to borrow yen has done it. And again, I'll get to the XRP part. That's the important part, right? So just hang out with me. As their interest rates have gone up, you've got our interest rates coming down. So those yields on treasuries are now paying less. The spread that people have to service that debt is now becoming a problem and it's getting squeezed. And at some point, you will see them start to delever positions in stocks and other areas where they've deployed that capital to rush to repay those loans. We first saw that start to happen in August of 2024, just 5 months after I put out the domino theory, where we saw 13% down in the S&P in one day. We saw 17% down in the Nikkei in a single day. And the Bank of Japan said, hey, well, we're not going to raise interest rates anymore. They had risen, from 25 basis points to 50 basis points just before that. And they said, as long as there's market volatility, we're going to hold here. And they have. They've held for more than a year there at those interest rates. But now their bond yields continue to rise and inflation in their economy continues to rise. If oil were to spike priced in yen because of conflicts in the Middle East and the Strait of Hormuz being shut down, that's a strategic choke point for their supply chain. And if there was a delay in shipments of oil, the price would surge, which would cause significant inflation and force the Bank of Japan's hand to raise interest rates. With all of that unwinding, you're going to see markets capitulate. Like we have stocks at an all-time high, you got gold at an all-time high, you've got silver, close to an all-time high. Crypto is down, while everything else has performed almost inversely correlated. While fundamentals for crypto are the highest that they've ever been, we're right on the precipice of the Clarity Act and all of these other things. So when that unwinds, because it will and it will at scale, it's not going to matter where you have your money. People are going to suck liquidity, tens of trillions of dollars out of the market and rush to repay those loans in yen. You've already seen the Fed buy a bunch of yen and de-risk from the dollar. You've seen Warren Buffett buy a bunch of yen because they both know this is coming and they got to be a lender in that situation because the FX market's going to get slammed when that happens. And the only way to really buffer that and process that real time is with a liquidity buffer like XRP. Japan is a big proponent for XRP. SBI Holdings is a direct, they're on the cap table for R3 and for Ripple. And Yoshitaka Kitao, who's the principal there at SBI, has been advocating for XRP for a long time to implement that for interbank settlement in their economy. So, and they actually run about 10% of the FX market globally there. So when all of that happens, I think that XRP is going to have to be a significantly higher price in order to be able to mitigate that risk and soften that blow. Otherwise, things are going to lock up. I don't know if you are familiar with Jim Rickards or not, but he
Absolutely.
has been a confidant or an advisor for the U.S. government for decades. And the reason I even came to these conclusions was he did an interview back in 2014 where he talked about this exact scenario playing out and how the dollar would be disintermediated as the global reserve currency. Well, again, like if you wanted to maintain control, you would maybe even orchestrate that yourself so that you had the next piece of the system that you could roll out, right? You had the SEC chair talk about this morning back in settlement on the stock market. with the DTCC and the clearinghouse between brokers and the clearinghouse. And you had the president of NASDAQ talk about that as well. That is the major application I see for XRP is back in settlement of the stock market. So all this unwinds, you have huge amounts of losses. The only way that people are going to be able to de-risk in that situation is moving to T+0. Right now, markets settle T+1. That's a significant improvement from where we were just 5-6 years ago, but it's still not real time. And so if you had significant losses in Bitcoin during this downturn, Bitcoin trades pretty much real time, not quite, but pretty close. And the investment banks would be way underwater, and they wouldn't be able to pull from other positions to be able to offset those losses because they're going to be underwater on everything else too. The only way they're going to be able to pull themselves out of this situation is to move to back end settlement real time on the stock market and be able to de-risk from those positions. And the only way to do that is to have enough liquidity in XRP for R3 Corda and Project Ion that was developed and finalized in 2022 to actually go live and facilitate that. So you might ask, well, how is XRP not going to be affected like the rest of the market here? Well, we're already down to a very low portion of the supply of XRP on exchanges. OTC desk and dark pools have very little left. What's on the exchanges is very little left. And you now have these ETFs that have had significant inflows that have eaten through the majority of that supply that was available for trade. And now it's locked up in ETFs. You've got, Evernorth launching, you've got other people committing capital for XRP in their treasury strategy. And so all of that combined, you have a supply shortage. You just need a supply shock. And when everybody needs it all at once, there's going to be a lot of demand and not a whole lot of supply. And I think that's going to push the price to somewhere between 3 and 4 digits in a very short period of time.
3 to 4 digits.
Yeah.
So who do you think it is that's like who's buying the XRP in that situation?
Exchanges will need it.
Okay.
If there's implications for Tether and they have problems, Shane Ellis put the theory out about Bitfinex going illiquid and pushing XRP's price to 589 many years ago. Large investment banks and other parties will need it. The ETF inflows, once people figure out that's the thing that's going to be used. You had Mark Yusko over there on it's not Good Morning Crypto anymore. It's Good Evening Crypto with Johnny and Abs. They just interviewed Mark Yusko, and he was like, well, there's this hearsay that, XRP and the XRPL will be the back-end settlement layer for everything. And I don't know if that's going to happen or not, but, if there was an announcement like that, how many people would be clamoring for it all at one time, right? So I think that this will be a coordinated effort to push the price substantially higher because that's really the only way it's going to have enough liquidity to be able to solve the issue when it arises, when that crisis happens.
And you feel like this is part of, like people would probably need to have been having this conversation, right? Like this is something that
decades.
Wow. And do you feel like there's any particular entity or place that this has come from? Like where did XRP come from in your mind?
You could probably take it all the way back to 2004 with Ryan Fruger in Canada. And then there's been, obviously Bitcoin came out in 2009. You had OpenCoin founded shortly after that, and they minted XNS, which is what XRP originally was, before they gifted, 80% of that supply to Ripple. And then they rebranded it to Ripples when they first took over. And then in 2014, the IMF came out with a white paper that talked about an exchange rate peg. And the abbreviation they used for the exchange rate peg was XRP. And shortly after that, Ripple rebranded Ripples to XRP, or the exchange rate peg. So, there's a long list of people that are probably involved with this. And again, if you knew that the dollar was on a path to no longer being the global reserve currency at some point, like you have Triffin's dilemma where you hollow out your manufacturing and you ship all of that overseas and then you export your inflation because you can do that. That's what every single reserve currency has done. And you've seen the pattern, right? Like it's happened 5 or 6 times over the past 500-600 years. Then you know what to expect and you know when to start working on that to be able to make sure that you're part of the next system or circumvent yourself, really disintermediate your own currency with the next solution. But you have to have buy-in also. It can't just be one party, because we've seen how that works with the sanctions, right? Like these other countries that want to participate globally, they're not game for these sanctions. Russia's mad. Iran is mad. North Korea also wants to participate, right? And you can blacklist wallet addresses on the XRPL to not take XRP from them, but you can't keep anybody else from transacting on the network. Because the origin account's been black holed for XRP, you can never mint anymore, and nobody can freeze the asset. So it is a true neutral bridge asset that everybody can trust and use. But there's also no clawback. So if you send it to the wrong place, like it's theirs. You can't get it back. Issued assets on the XRPL, you can, they have smart contracts that allow a clawback provision, which banks and institutions need to be able to mint stable coins. You saw Zandbank come out this morning and talk about an AED stable coin there in the UAE. You've got other people that are now launching stable coins alongside Ripple on the XRPL, talking about that this morning. And so if all of these sovereign nations and people that are issuing stable coins had a neutral bridge asset that nobody else could control, that is part of their treasury, but then they could issue the assets that they have full purview of and control of, that gives everybody a level playing field to be able to interact and participate in the global economy, and you get buy-in from all the other people.
So we got some people commenting, and in general, right, I'm sure that every time that you say anything like 3-digit, 4-digit XRP, people are like, what are you talking about? So I want to look at some of the comments. We have Johannes saying basically like, bro, $100. And then he says $1,000 XRP equals a $57 trillion market cap.
Yep.
That's 2 times US GDP.
Correct.
There isn't enough global liquidity in existence to support that price. The math doesn't add up. And what would you say to that?
That's a good point, right? So if you calculate the total market cap of crypto and you're relating that to stocks, you would be absolutely correct. Unfortunately, the circulating supply of XRP is 100 billion. The available supply is much, much lower than that. Well, actually, so the total supply is 100 billion. What's circulating is around 52 billion. And the available supply, I would say, is less than 100 million on exchanges. So you're looking at the total amount of stocks outstanding times the price per share to get the market cap. It's a very simple equation. I actually just wrote a white paper on what I call the liquidity index, which I believe is a much better marker or metric to be able to value cryptocurrencies by.
Did you put this out?
We haven't put it out yet.
Okay.
I finalized it this last weekend.
Gotcha.
But yeah, market cap is great for stocks and shares and companies and valuations on that side. What I would challenge you with is imagine trying to quantify the value of the email protocol. Like imagine you sent $1 every time you sent an email. How much liquidity would have to be in the asset or whatever, on-chain data packet it used to be able to transfer that value to be able to facilitate that at scale if there was a limited supply, right? So it's a very different market dynamic. And today market cap would apply. I will say that is accurate because of the circumstances that exist with exchanges. Again, you're looking at available supply and then the, total price per trade. On the other side of utility, it will have a much different mechanism by which people value this, and it will be substantially higher than the total global GDP for the market cap of the asset. And that's why I think liquidity index is a much better indicator of like what this is as a protocol versus a company.
I love it. I think first off, I really respect also your ability to say, as it is right now, right? The market cap is actually still relevant.
Yes.
Right. Because the asset is not being utilized in the way that we're saying could happen. So that's a really important nuance. And it's the thing that we have talked about on the show in the past, because as it stands, right, we do have to continue to look at these things as purely speculative assets. One other challenge that people often bring to the XRP question is, why wouldn't banks just use their own? Like, why wouldn't they come up with their own
They
blockchain?
will. They'll issue their own stablecoin. But so banks don't trust each other after 2008, right? And you also have this Nostro Vostro system that exists today, where there's about $27 trillion locked up globally that just sits there to be able to settle between counterparties. Nostro Vostro means yours and mine in Latin. And so you take some of my money, I park it over here at the bank, and I take some of yours and I park it over here at my bank. And when you send me a payment, we take it out of that. You, if you could unlock that money for the banks, how much better purpose do you think they could provide for that capital? Right. That's why they charge you for wires now, and they really don't even make anything on wires. It's just a hassle, and half the time they call you and tell you, it's a scam, you shouldn't send your money, blah blah blah, because they don't want that money to leave their ecosystem. Stable coins for interbank settlement are great, right? Because now you have a unified accounting mechanism across all of your branches and internal systems. You can settle real time between accounts, no problems. But if I'm Citi and you're Bank of America and you tell me you want to send me your stable coin, I don't want your stable coin. I want my stable coin because I'm holding treasuries and I'm earning the yield on the stable coin. So consumers, people think about how they're going to transact with this and not at an institutional level. I do think that stable coins would be available for people. You'll have peer-to-peer payment systems and merchant services, and I think a lot of those probably end up on Hyperledger or Hedera. But for back-end settlement of institutional accounts for enterprises, the XRPL is uniquely positioned to take that market share. And it's a neutral bridge asset that allows them to unlock $27 trillion. And let's say they didn't do that. Let's say they did just roll out the stablecoin narrative that you mentioned. It just exacerbates all of that Nostro Vostro accounts. Now I've got to hold my stablecoin with all of these other counterparties, and they've got to hold theirs. I've got to hold theirs on my books over here so that we can settle between one another. And it just locks up trillions of dollars instead of unlocking value, which is the whole premise behind this technology.
You're watching the highlights from a conversation on our live show, Memes and Markets. Be sure to subscribe to this channel to make sure that you don't miss the best parts of our conversation from our live streams, where we go live every Tuesday and Thursday at 12 p.m. Eastern. Now, back to the highlights. Another thing that people often ask about is why does... Okay, so Ripple is the company, right, that has continued to kind of distribute this asset as well as support the development of the XRP ledger. A lot of people come in and they're like, look, this company Ripple has a bright future. Lots of opportunity there. This XRP thing, I don't know. And the thing that they'll usually say to also hammer this point in is, well, why is Ripple always selling XRP?
It's a good point.
What do you think of that?
Well, so it's kind of a chicken and the egg, right? Like you got to be able to get to market and get things to scale. And you also don't want it to be a security of the company, because then there's a counterparty, right? Somebody issued this asset and they seem as though they have control of it. Ripple only runs 3 of the validators that vote on the UNL for the XRPL. There's 35 that actually have to approve new amendments. So they have some say-so, but it's decentralized. A lot of people would state that it isn't because they see the amount that's held by Ripple, but it's not staked, right? So they don't have control over the network like somebody that manages Ethereum or some of these other assets that have governance based on the amount that they hold. Now, the valuation of the company versus the asset, right? So we own both. I have equity in Ripple, and then we also have XRP itself. They absolutely do sell XRP every single month onto the market to be able to fund their business and their acquisitions and their growth in order to be able to get additional benefit for the network and the asset itself, because you need distribution, you need adoption, you need gateways, and it's more of a Trojan horse type play, right? So they've integrated with all of these payment providers globally, institutions, enterprises. They're now doing treasury management. They bought a prime broker. They can, create margin against the asset and other tokenized assets. And they have all of these tools because they've, aggregated value in XRP over an extended period of time and be able to sell that onto the market to fund their business and scale this out. That doesn't mean that they're in opposition to the asset. That means they're trying to get distribution for the asset so that it can be used at scale and it benefits them. I mean, imagine they've got about 5 billion XRP on their balance sheet that they use for ODL and other things. And then they've got the other portion of XRP that they have in the escrow. For a long time, they didn't even include the portion that they had in the escrow in the valuation for the business. In 2024, the day that the DTCC went live for T+1, May 28th, I was at Consensus and I listened to Brad Garlinghouse speak on that topic. And that was the first time I ever heard him include the escrow in the valuation for their business. Up to that point, he really hadn't, but I think he knew that they were going to win the lawsuit at that point. So anyway, it's a weird deal, right? People look at that and they say, okay, well, they're suppressing the price. They are. They're holding it down. They're holding it stable, right? So that's the other piece of this. You need a treasury. If you were going to use a network and an asset as a settlement mechanism, it can't be hugely volatile. That is not good for settling value between counterparties. If I send you money and by the time it gets there, it's a different value than when I sent it, not good. So they need a very stable price. In order to be able to facilitate that, you need some type of escrow or something to be able to release enough onto the market to meet demand and hold price stability, which is what they do. And you'll see XRP trend sideways, and that's why people hate it. It just stays sideways for extended periods of time for them to be able to trial and get this to market. So when they're ready and when the world's ready and when they need it, this is going to be, it's trialed, tested, been around 13 years, never been down, only been paused twice. It is the only thing with enough uptime and track record that banks and institutions would ever adopt.
I've got just a couple other things, and then I'm going to step back and let Ben properly participate in the conversation. I'll stop hogging the mic, but Johannes Winter, I get that a low circulating supply creates scarcity, but even then, a $1,000 price still puts the total valuation at $57 trillion. No, not trying to be rude, just understand. And I want to respond to this as well.
Well, and I'll talk to that point again too. So most people, when they look at market cap, they think that that's a total amount of inflow.
Exactly.
That something has to have in order to reach that market cap. It's not the case. It's just the price per total circulating supply of whatever it is. So if people bid the price up and there is a certain amount of supply and a certain amount of demand on the market, the price can be substantially higher than those total inflows, right? Zach talks about the multiplier deal. And that's a real thing, right? Like, a certain amount of inflow on XRP on exchanges actually causes the price to be a multiple of how much that inflow was versus the market cap. And I think that's the hard concept for people. They think, okay, well, like all of the money in all of, twice of reality has to move into this asset. That's not the case. In the stock market, it's different, right? Like, again, you have all of the circulating supply of those shares available for trade at any given time. Now, some of them are locked up in ETFs and other things, but you get a multiple on stocks too, right?
Yeah.
Versus the income and other stuff.
Exactly. 100%. I mean, this is a big point that Ray Dalio makes when he's talking about the AI bubble. He's like, well, if everyone starts to sell at once, guess what? You're not all going to get all of the value of that company out. Right. That's just not how market cap works. Market cap is a valuation metric. Right. It is not a liquidity metric, which is also, to your point, of 100%. That there's a different way of looking at the valuation. So you did exactly what I was going to try to go in about there. The last thing I really wanted to get your thoughts on is Tether, because I've heard you talk about how Tether, in this event of the domino theory, could potentially depeg or have some issues. Can you talk a little bit about Tether, maybe like their business model, or where you think that there's some opportunities for an event like that to occur?
Well, so I've had some conversations on Twitter over the years. So on Tether's balance sheet, Tether, the company itself, owns other assets, both Bitcoin and gold, a lot of gold at this point that they bought in Q4 of last year. We've never had a full audit of Tether. We don't know exactly what backs all of their one-to-one that they're supposed to be doing. They also aren't compliant with the Genius Act, right? They've got 3 years to figure that out, which is fine. Howard Lutnick has moved on. And so And you got Bo Hines that's moved over there, and they have USAT. Like, why would you launch a US compliant stablecoin if you were going to continue to use the old one? Why wouldn't you just make that one compliant?
Exactly.
Right. They are the 16th largest holder for U.S. Treasuries. I think that they got rolled into the U.S. government sometime between 2014 and 2015 as a proxy for the Fed to be able to soak up treasuries that float onto the market from foreign holders. So we've seen huge amounts of treasuries, delevered by China and Russia over the past 4 or 5 years here. You know who the majority buyer of that was? Tether. So, I think they showed up and they were like, hey, look, you can go to jail or you can work with us and we'll help you become, the most profitable company by capita in the world. How's that sound? And we're like, deal. That sounds great. So I think it'll be around. I just, if there is a situation where Bitcoin and gold fall substantially, there wouldn't be enough backing. And if people found that out, very similar to kind of an FTX situation, there'll be a run on it. And then it's just a downward spiral, right? And it continues to put pressure on it. The other thing that could happen that was mentioned by a Ripple developer in a conversation that I had on Twitter was that they could be sanctioned. So the Epstein documents that have come out, kind of tying Epstein to Bitcoin and some other things, there may be, there's another 50% of those documents that's still yet to be released. If there was something that, came out in those documents that was very damning for Tether and its ability to circumvent sanctions or move around other payment networks, it's a great honeypot, by the way, because it's a public blockchain. And if you could figure out who sent the money, it would be really easy to see what was going on for illicit crimes and activity. But I don't know. It's one of the two. I don't know if it'll depeg or get sanctioned, but I think there's absolutely going to be problems with Tether when the reverse carry trade unwinds. And then exchanges will be clamoring for another liquidity option to be able to facilitate trades and, de-risk and do everything else, just like, the Chain Atlas theory talks about.
Understood, man. Thanks for breaking that down. I've got one other thing because someone responded on Twitter yesterday to us having you on, and he had some ideas that he wanted to, I guess, challenge on the domino theory. Okay. Now, there's one in particular that I think is worth actually talking about, but basically he's saying, how high of the price does oil need to get to for this to be a spike? And what if oil doesn't hit that level? What if Japan has different ways of basically trying to fight inflation? Was another thing. He said some other form of quantitative easing measures.
Well, it just exacerbates inflation if they add more currency. Yeah. So on the oil spike, you're going to need to see a 20 or 30% move in oil priced in yen to really get them to budge. If it's a gradual thing, it's not going to happen. It needs to be a very prominent move in a short period of time for them to have to react to it.
And then the only thing that I thought was also worth talking about is what if the Clarity Act does pass and then XRP isn't the only asset with clarity?
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of people have asked that question. It's interesting to me they continue to kick the can on this and they've separated it out from the Genius Act. I was on Capitol Hill advocating for both when the Genius Act got passed, and I got to talk to all the congressmen and the congresswomen there and ask them, what they thought was going to happen. And they said, I think we'll get Genius passed, but clarity is probably going to be 2026. Funny how that played out. But yeah, to his point, there would be competition for XRP in that scenario, but I would challenge that and say that the amendments that have been proposed on the XRPL and accepted at this point provide the highest level of compliance for other institutions to use it: digital identity, credentials, permission domains, and now we have permission dexes going live here in 8 days. That allows for, I don't want to say siloed ecosystems, but walled gardens to participate on the mainnet that allowed only people with the credentials that were required to be able to participate or get access to certain ecosystems. And that is what people want, right? That's what the banks want. They don't want everybody to be able to see all of the on-chain provenance of all the transactions that they're doing. They want their cake and they want to eat it too. So there isn't really anything else out there that has digital identity baked in at the same scale for compliance for AML, OFAC, BIS, KYC, KYB, accreditation. If you're a QP or sophisticated investor in other jurisdictions, digital identity on the XRPL is far above and beyond these other ones. And now that you have kind of a zero knowledge proof component to it, I think it's going to be much more widely accepted versus something like a Solana, where they don't really have any private chains or anything. Corda did trial Solana right here recently in the not too distant past. It's also had a bunch of problems where it's been down. It just hasn't been around as long as the XRPL. And Corda has a lot of the smart contracts to be able to fill those gaps that the XRPL has on the mainnet. We work with R3 for some other stuff. But yeah, the Corda settler can absolutely use, a number of assets at this point, but its primary settlement mechanism is XRP. Which again, Project Ion on the back end of the stock market was developed specifically for back-end settlement, and that's the first application that the SEC and NASDAQ and the New York Stock Exchange is discussing distributed ledger technology being used in.
What did you think of them bringing up the DTCC in particular, rather, saying that they're going to start tokenizing securities in the second half of this year using the Canton network? Some people are saying that that's like competitive to what Ripple is doing in XRP.
You could argue that. So they have the multi-purpose token on the XRPL that allows for voting and share rights for the same fungible token. I don't know what issue assets work like on the Canton network, but they seem to be gaining a lot of traction for RWAs. The tokenization and the accounting mechanism for the total outstanding shares versus the settlement mechanism are two different components. Canton's token is really to pay fees on the network. It doesn't settle value. It's for people participating in the ecosystem. Very similar to Quant. And that doesn't mean it won't do well, especially if there's volume and demand for the token to be able to participate and issue stocks on that chain. It just doesn't facilitate the settlement between the clearinghouses and the brokers, which is the role that XRP will play.
Very well. Someone had actually just asked about Quant, so you answered that as well. Ben, I have run my mouth. You're watching the highlights from a conversation on our live show, Memes and Markets. Be sure to subscribe to this channel to make sure that you don't miss the best parts of our conversation from our live streams, where we go live every Tuesday and Thursday at 12 p.m. Eastern. Now, back to the highlights.
You're good, man. You're good. I know many of the people that were here were here for that. So I just figured I'd sit, listen, and enjoy. But Jake, I've got some questions more on like the meme side of things in terms of like the culture, the movement, because XRP certainly has a lot of the things that pique my interest.
Yeah.
Because I was never a big XRP guy. I'd say my XRP knowledge really came from getting to know Keith a lot more and him educating me on it. But as soon as I started studying the social phenomenon of the XRP movement, I noticed that it really attracted like a very consistent type of person. And so I was wondering, like, when did you find XRP, and have you noticed something similar?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I actually wasn't even in crypto until 2020.
Okay.
Right place, right time, had some cash, did well. And XRP was an allocation that I had. I'd originally invested in 13 different projects, and then I consolidated all of the money that I made in 2022 into XRP, because at that point I felt like, okay, like this is the for sure thing. You would say I'm risky, right? Like a lot of people would say I'm risky for being in the space.
You speak in absolutes a lot, which is definitely the scariest thing, because people are listening to you, right? All the time. And and that's like the scariest thing, because to bring it back to your like price predictions that you were making before New Year's, I was sending that back to Keith being like, this guy's crazy. I was like,
I am. So my definition of crazy is you can see things other people can't. And sometimes that's not a good thing. But you could have called Michael Burry crazy. The banks did. They lent him the money because they were like, yeah, we'll let you bet against the housing market. This is never going to collapse. You're crazy, my man.
Okay. So you're banking on the fact that zoomed out enough, you'll be vindicated with these predictions.
For sure.
So what's that timeline look like then? Like how big a runway do you get?
Well, I mean, that's up to people, right? I don't get to make that call. I will put my nuts on the line and make statements. My attorneys have told me to refrain from doing so moving forward.
I figured that would be the case.
Like I'm not going to back down. I have very strong belief in this,
Okay.
and I've had enough validation from the right people
Mhm.
that lead me to believe that this is the outcome that will take place. Um, but as far as the community goes, it's definitely a consistent type of person that it attracts. Um, I've found that most people are faith based that own XRP, which is unique, um, and beautiful, by the way. Most people are well to do. You know, they want to take care of their themselves and their family, but anything beyond, you know, what they kind of dream for themselves, they want to give back and do really cool stuff with.
Mhm.
I was on Nathan Cashew Nate's podcast, and he asked me a question, and I told him I think the meek will inherit the earth, and I really do believe that. I think that's what this is for XRP. I think it's a wealth transfer where good-hearted people will end up with enough value that they can affect real change for others and do cool stuff.
Okay.
Um, and the demographic, you know, that we work with at Digital Wealth Partners, the services we provide, and at the family office, most of our clients are somewhere between 35 and 80 years old.
Mhm.
It's not, you know, I mean, we have some that are in their 20s or in their teens that have accumulated some XRP. But the demographic that is, you know, I would call maybe Gen X and boomers, they don't think the banks are going to go away. They're not going to be disintermediated. They don't think that this is just going to be a free DeFi ecosystem, free for all, where people can participate without compliance and oversight.
Mhm.
And so XRP being the banker's coin, right? Like that's appealing to them. It makes sense. It transfers value. It solves a gap in the market, creates a solution where there isn't one today, and they can see how that would actually play out and be used versus some of these other tokens that are like, where does the demand come from, right? The tokenomics on stuff, and you could argue that the tokenomics on XRP are crazy, right? Like
Mhm.
100 billion, like why would you need that supply? Well, if you didn't want whatever it was to be an astronomical price for moving value between the economies that exist today and the economies of the future as we scale into AI and, you know, humanoid robots and all this other stuff where GDP becomes uncapped per capita and becomes infinite, like you need a system and solution to be able to do that. And the only way that you have that is you need something that's going to last thousands of years, and you need something that is dynamic and elastic enough that it can expand as size increases.
Mhm.
Um, so anyway, back to the culture. You know, there's been this ethos for a long time that the XRP is going to be a very high price, and I think that that has absolutely helped Ripple, right? Because if you had that out in the market and people believe that, they're going to hold on to it.
Mhm.
The more that gets taken off the market, the scarcer the supply is that's openly traded, and the higher the price will get pushed, right? Supply and demand dynamics. And so I think it's kind of created this perfect storm for this to actually play out. And, you know, people aren't going to sell until they see the significantly higher prices that many people are hopeful for.
Totally. Yeah, no, and I appreciate you taking that one. And I do appreciate the conviction that you have in your predictions. And I can totally see how on a long enough time horizon you could be 100% correct. But with that, why make time-based ones then?
Well, so in at Swell in 2026, well, actually 2025, excuse me, that's the first year that they came out and gave timelines. And it wasn't me that gave timelines; it was the institutions and the banks, right? Like we had State Street, you had BlackRock, you had Blackstone, you had BNY, you had Fidelity, you had Citi, all talking about the tokenization of these different asset classes in the next 2 years by the end of 2028. So if the utility of this asset is going to be used to settle all of that value, and the real killer app for crypto is payments, and that's kind of the predecessor, you have to have enough liquidity on chain to start moving assets and have a market. That's why none of this has gained traction yet. Like you've securitized this tokenized a bunch of these funds. There's no market.
Hmm.
Like it's a cool deal, you know, and they've got to trial it and get it to market and do all the stuff that they're going to do, but it really doesn't provide additional value today because there's not enough liquidity in those ecosystems for people to transact like there is on the stock market or other
Mhm.
markets.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Once you see that liquidity move into those ecosystems through stable coins, which likely will get issued on the XRPL as XRP being the intermediary asset, then you can start to see those marketplaces open up, and you'll see, all of that adoption for the tokenization of stocks and, other equities, private markets, real estate, all the things that people want to tokenize and think that it's beneficial for. None of that can happen until you have custody, identity, and liquidity on chain for that to actually function in a regulated environment.
So why the New Year's prediction? Like what gave you the conviction that there was going to be this massive price appreciation moment? And also that's one thing I want to ask you about too, is that there's a few things that I hear like parroted from the community of XRP people. Like and I think they're mostly coming from you. Like they're people watching your stuff and then taking it elsewhere. Yeah. One of them is like the whole, you don't understand market cap thing. Like we've seen that comment so many times. I'm assuming that's from you. And the other one is post price appreciation. So again, like, why is it all going to happen at once? And why did you think that would be New Year's?
I have some NDAs.
Okay.
And I felt confident that things could play out in that time frame. Also I had a bet at the end of the year.
Yeah, how'd that go?
It was cool. So the whole reason I made that bet on the time frame was the other gentleman that I'd made that bet with had bet other people and taken their XRP in those bets. And my bet to him was, hey, if I'm wrong or you're wrong, either way, the people that you took the XRP from, they get paid back. I've been afforded, a lot of good things in my life. I'm very blessed and grateful for a lot. And I could lose that XRP and be okay. Right. Those other people, some people like grind hard for the amount of XRP that they have. And for them to just lose that to somebody else on a bet on Twitter, I didn't feel good about. So all of those people have been returned their XRP. And so that was the whole premise behind the bet. And I was happy that it went either way because I knew those people were going to get paid back.
Totally.
But that ended up being a really hypey deal. I didn't intend it to make it that way when I made the bet, but everybody just kind of ran with it. And he picked the price and the date, and I was like, all right, that's fine. Because I wanted those people to get their money back.
Definitely.
But, I did have a lot of conviction there toward the end of the year that things were going to move geopolitically. And we've already seen those happen. Like we had Venezuela that happened. And now you have all of the elements for the storm to happen there in the Middle East that's going to cause oil to spike when conflict breaks out. And you already had the conflict between Iran and Israel that had almost escalated to the point where they had closed the Strait of Hormuz over the summer. The parliament there in Iran had already voted that they could do that. And so, all of the elements were present for that to happen in a very short period of time. And when it does happen, when all of this rolls out, it's going to be very fast sequence of events that takes place.
I saw a video last night where you were talking about that effect, that sudden wealth syndrome kind of thing, where it's like, now what? And something that I think is super relevant to a lot of the people watching is a lot of people who are in XRP, they are preparing for some sort of an event, right? Where you see massive price appreciation. And one of the things that I've struggled with throughout the past 6 years, whatever, of thinking about this is, and people ask me like, do I sell during that event? Like do I sell when XRP goes up to $10? Do I sell all of it? Do I sell some of it? Right. And I try to tell people to always take an approach of laddering in and out of positions, right? No matter what it is. But the other argument is, right, just like a Bitcoiner who's like on the Bitcoin standard. It's like, I'm never selling my Bitcoin. I'm only going to continue to accumulate more and more and more of it. How do you look at that with no financial advice?
Again, it's always situation dependent and what the outcome you want to be. It also matters how much you have, your age, your obligations, right? And again, that's why we have the financial advisors. I can kind of speak to myself, right? So that's what I normally do. I'm in my mid 30s. Have decent income from other sources. Don't necessarily need that liquidity. Would it be nice to have? Sure. We've created solutions where you can borrow against it tax-free. You still have to pay the interest on the loans. We're working on some other solutions to be able to hold it inside life insurance where you could borrow against the cash value of that. That's been a technique that the wealthy have used for over 100 years here in the U.S. to be able to preserve and pass on their wealth without the taxes. We're also creating ways to be able to generate income off of your XRP so that you have a monthly dividend that you're receiving so that you don't have to liquidate and deal with the tax implications. Because if you do have a low basis and you sell, and we still have capital gains on crypto. I don't know if that's going to be the case or not. I'm hopeful, like everybody else. Trump says no capital gains. That'll incentivize a lot of selling. There will be a lot of selling if that takes place.
True.
But then you have to think about, on the Bitcoiner deal, and if you're a Bitcoin maxi, if you held Bitcoin for 10 years, did really well. If you sold all your Bitcoin at $10 or $100, you probably look back and regret that a little bit, right? I like the ladder in, ladder out strategy, DCA type stuff. I think that makes a sense for a lot of people. What I would challenge people with is know what you're going to do with the money.
Love it.
Because if you're just selling to sell and this is your price target, again, it's like the dog chasing the car. Like you might catch the car, but then you might run yourself over. And if you don't have a plan for that money to reinvest it or use it for something productive, it's probably going to get wasted. Money burns a hole in people's pockets if they don't have a plan for it. And they'll end up buying a bunch of liabilities that they can't afford. And that is how you go bankrupt when you come into a bunch of money, is you buy a bunch of liabilities that cost you money every month and not assets that put money in your pocket every month.
What was the source for you? Like, what was your gateway into XRP?
Oh, man. Digital Dave was one of the people that I watched early on. He was in Taiwan and had retired off of crypto. And I was like, all right, well, if you retired off of crypto and moved abroad, like you probably did pretty well.
Yeah.
So I watched a lot of his content. I mean, there's Bearable Bull, in 2020. Shout out to the Bearable Bull.
That's wild, yeah.
DAI and Brad Kimes, digital perspectives. I used to watch those guys all the time when I first got into the space to understand what was going on over here. And a lot of other people too. Again, I was in Theta, I was in Cardano, I was in Chainlink, I was in VeChain. Like I had a bunch of different positions, tokens that I thought would have long-term utility in the space.
Got it.
But yeah, I mean, through YouTube primarily. And then I got on Twitter and I found out that there's this whole crypto Twitter thing.
Huge.
Which is wild.
Mm-hmm. I'm not a huge XRP guy, but I study social phenomena quite a bit. And like, it feels like you guys have like a massive cult. Like,
it is a cult.
Yeah, it's like, it literally feels like a cult. The first thing I said to Keith is like, this feels like a cult and this feels like one of their leaders. And like, this is crazy.
You're not wrong, dude. And I feel super weird about it all the time. My team will tell me that. And I'm like, I'm aware. I'm self-aware of the situation that's going on. It is, yeah. Well, I mean, when you have strong faith in something, right? People want to believe in something,
Totally.
and especially if it's going to better their life. And what I like about this is it's not malicious. Like I really do believe everything that I'm saying, and I have my own conviction and investments in the same deal. I've built a whole business around it on the premise that this is going to happen. Like I don't know how much more I could personally bet on this, right? So, for me, and I really do think it's going to change people's lives substantially. If it was like a Ponzi scheme or people were being taken advantage of or like any of that stuff, I don't know. I've tried to do some like B2C sales in my lifetime. I feel super skeezy. Like when I was out of college, I had a short internship at Northwestern Mutual.
Okay.
And I couldn't do it. Like, I was just like, this is snake oil stuff. Anyway, so I honestly believe everything that I say. I've done the research. I've had the connections and conversations. And that's why I'm up here. If I didn't believe it at the level that I do, I definitely wouldn't make the content about it.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. And there are so many of you guys that if we do get the things to happen that you're predicting, like, obviously, I think price appreciation would follow. I think the numbers you're throwing out there, in my opinion, are crazy. But I do think that we will see some crazy appreciation if things move.
Well, I mean, think about Bitcoin, and obviously the supply is much more finite there. But I would argue that there's a similar supply constriction existing for XRP in the environment that we have now, with all of the other components that I mentioned earlier. And early on, when people said Bitcoin would get to $100 or $1,000 or $10,000,
yeah, no one would have believed.
Everybody scoffed and said that was crazy.
Yeah,
right. So that's the other thing that gives me a lot of faith in this is we've already seen it happen for some of these other ones.
Totally. No, that's a very valid point. Like if you go back and look at the charts, people, and I recommend you doing that, like just go look at the lifespan of Bitcoin and how much it's moved and when it crashed, how many people would have said, you guys were all idiots. Like you never should have bought this thing. It's never coming back. And then it happened again and again and again. And we're currently in one of those things where everyone thinks that Bitcoin and crypto is dead, but these things turn on a dime. So I really think that's a fair perspective. Did you have any more questions or do you want to go through the news with Jake if he has time? Do you have a hard out, Jake?
Actually, I'm 2 minutes over when I need to jump.
Okay.
Cool.
Then,
Yep.
well, Jake's stuff is linked down below. So his YouTube channel and his Twitter are linked down below. They're the first links down below. So if you've enjoyed the conversation, go show Jake some love on his channel and over on Twitter. And we appreciate you coming on, man.
Yeah, dude, this is
Yeah, dude.
awesome. Thanks for the time and the great questions. Hopefully it was valuable for the viewers out there.
Absolutely. So that's the channel right there. Links are down below and Twitter's there as well too. He's very active on Twitter. So if you want consistent stuff, I'd recommend both, but Twitter is very active.
Yeah.
Thanks for doing this, man. We appreciate it.
Absolutely, dude. Appreciate y'all having me.
Appreciate Jake.
Cool.
Y'all have a good one. Thank
Have
you.
a great
too,
day.
man.
Yeah.
Cheers. Bye.
Wait, if you enjoyed this, then you have to watch our conversation with Abs from Good Evening Crypto next. He breaks down who was really behind XRP from the very beginning and why it may have been the chosen one all along. Click here to watch the highlights.